orange coin is good, and it's here to stay, and it is going to be increasingly the base layer of money. And it is going to replace gold in central bank vaults. We will have a strategic Bitcoin reserve. There are other countries that already have it. And it won't completely replace gold, because gold has a role as a physical store of value. Bitcoin is better because it's more portable and more divisible, and I can stuff it in my computer and send it to you, which gold I can't. I have to hand it to you. But gold still will have a role, but it will have a lesser role relative to Bitcoin.
In today's video, we will explore Mark Yusko's most recent observations on market sentiment in the wake of the recent election. Yusko opens with a note of cautious optimism, suggesting that while some post-election uncertainty has dissipated, we may see a short-term market rally. However, he quickly shifts focus to the bigger picture, the reality that neither political party will reverse the relentless trend of currency devaluation. Yusko contends that the value of fiat currency is steadily declining because the United States and many other nations are caught in a loop of printing more dollars to pay off enormous debts. He highlights how Bitcoin is unique and views its devaluation as an inevitable result of unmanageable debt levels. Bitcoin maintains a fixed quantity and fundamental stability, in contrast to fiat currencies, which are greatly impacted by economic policies. Before we get started, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss our updates on cryptocurrencies and the digital asset space. Now let's hear his following words.
I think now that uncertainty's gone, we have certainty. And like I say, we don't have to worry about it for the next 3 weeks, changing it. Anyway, I think markets will do well in the short run. And look, I did a podcast on this last week. They said, well, what's going to happen? I said, well, look, in the end, Bitcoin and digital assets, doesn't matter who wins, number go up. Why? Because dollar going to go down. And that's all it really is. Remember, one Bitcoin's one Bitcoin. Bitcoin never changes. It's how we value it in a currency, a base currency. So in Argentina, number doesn't ever go down because the peso just keeps going down. Or in Turkey, the number go up because the lira goes down. So the same things happen with the dollar and the yen. The yen, that's why I love Metaplanet. The yen, forget about it. It's going down, 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 down. Euro going to go down, dollar going to go down, because the only way out of these massive debts is to print. So that's really good for digital. But short term, Kamala, bad for crypto short term. We would have had probably a $10,000 sell-off. But long term, better, because she was going to keep the cult of Kelton alive. The Donald, definitely better in the short run. But now I think we'll probably give some back. There'll be another entry point before we take the big leg up. Orange coin is good. And it's here to stay. And it is going to be increasingly the base layer of money. And it is going to replace gold in central bank vaults. We will have a strategic Bitcoin reserve. There are other countries that already have it. And it won't completely replace gold, because gold has a role as a physical store of value. Bitcoin is better because it's more portable and more divisible, and I can stuff it in my computer and send it to you, which gold I can't. I have to hand it to you. But gold still will have a role, but it will have a lesser role relative to Bitcoin. And that is so inevitable. And anyone who wants to argue that point at this point is being obstinate for obstinate's sake. Do I think Donald Trump is a giant Bitcoiner? No. Do I think that he is an incredible opportunist? Absolutely. The last time he was in office, he did a pretty good job. I'd give him a B+ for that. This time, it's looking like an A. Maybe we'll just pay off all the debt around the world in Bitcoin. And at first it's like,
check.
Well, no. Here's the thing. At first, it's kind of a silly statement, right? It's kind of, we'll just print the $1 trillion coin. Remember that nonsense that they were just going to print a $1 trillion coin and hand them out? But the difference here is, when you think about debt, right? There are only 4 things you can do. So once you get massively in debt, there are 4 ways out. You can pay it back. Well, but the problem is, if you confiscated all the wealth of all the citizens, you couldn't pay out, not their income, all the wealth. You couldn't pay down that. Okay, so that's the first problem. Second thing you can do is you can default on it. Well, now governments that default get kicked out. So politicians don't like to get kicked out, so they're not going to default on it. I mean, that's a last resort. third thing you can do is you can restructure it. Now, this is interesting. The only way you can restructure it is you get someone to take the other deal. So if you say, hey, I'll give you 70 cents on the dollar for your debt, the average holder outside in China or Russia is going to say, screw you, I want 100 cents. You told me it was money good. If you told them, I'll give you 50 cents on the dollar, but in Bitcoin, that actually starts to maybe be interesting, because the fourth way out, which is going to continue, right, is devalue the currency. That is going to continue because every president, doesn't matter left, right, center, blue, red, purple, does not matter. The amount of deficit spending and debt continues to rise, which is just a devaluation of the currency. And we were just told by the American people that these are the things they care about. And the thing they cared about most was having their wealth stolen from them, their income stolen from them in the form of inflation. But see, I argue it's not inflation. We call it inflation, but inflation is when there's excess demand for too little goods and prices rise. That's inflation. What we have is currency devaluation through the lunacy of MMT. The cult of Kelton, thankfully, the biggest win last night is the cult of Kelton is now dead. The cult of Kelton is gone. And we are not going to have this nonsense that we can print money out of thin air with no not retribution, but with no response from the rest of the world and from our own country.
Mark Yusko draws attention to an interesting historical trend called the 90-year cycle, which suggests that the United States appears to go through a significant economic downturn around every 90 years. He cautions that another depression may be on the horizon, but he is cautious not to give a specific date because of the current financial instability and the aftermath of previous crises. Yusko highlights how important it is for investors to safeguard their wealth because of these frequent economic downturns. He advises diversifying into assets that are less vulnerable to inflation and the continuous depreciation of fiat currencies, such as Bitcoin. He also raises grave worries over corporate corruption, citing concerning instances from the technology sector. In one such instance, Nvidia recently requested immunity from fraud accusations from the Supreme Court. Yusko sees this as a red flag, hinting at deeper issues in the corporate world that could add to stock market instability. He believes these risky and questionable practices highlight vulnerabilities that investors should be aware of.
If we're really gonna address the deficit, that actually is less good for economic growth. We have a demographic problem in this country, right? Every single day, 10,000 people turn 65. Every single day. And 65-year-old to 85-year-olds don't spend as much. They don't party as much. They don't, they
use as much.
They save. They buy bonds. And it doesn't mean they're bad people. And I'm starting to get closer to that age, but it's just reality. And so demographics are destiny, and growth goes down, interest rates go down. And so that is a challenge. Now, Tim Peterson, who I love, Tim is great, N Squared Crypto. And he tweeted something today that there is a precedent for this, where a president gets elected, then loses, then gets elected again. Unfortunately, the last time that happened, we had a massive depression in 1893. And it wasn't causal, but there are some things that have happened, partly because of the bad policies of the money printing and the inflationary problems and the slowdown in growth, plus the demographics and the fact that we can't afford the debt service. There's a bunch of things that could spiral into a challenging environment. Now, the flip side of that is, I don't know if you've been to a restaurant lately, but they're packed to the gills. We were at a lacrosse tournament this weekend.
Flights, hotels.
I mean,
it's been that way. Yeah.
So despite the rhetoric that things are slowing down and we're near a recession, I don't see it in the anecdotal evidence. The data is a little less clear. I mean, ISM's down, but to answer your question, a businessman in the White House is pro-business, is likely good for markets. Can Powell, I assume he's just going to leave Powell alone and let him, because he's the one that appointed him in the first place. I assume he's going to leave him alone and let him walk the tightrope, which I think is a pretty serious tightrope. It's going to need a very long balancing bar, but I think, you probably leave him alone. we get rid of the cult of Kelton and we slow down the money printer, that creates a little bit of a headwind, but it's likely that there'll be some tax incentives and policy moves that are very pro profitability. And I think there's enough money sloshing around the system in terms of just money supply. And China, this is the other thing. All the negative rhetoric about China, that's fine. That's easy as how you get elected in the United States, is hate China. But China quietly is printing lots and lots and lots of renminbi. And that actually is way more important than how many dollars get printed for global trade. And then the last thing I'll say is, I feel like last time the Trump campaign was all about nationalism and reducing globalism. I didn't get that sense this time. I mean, maybe I'm wrong, but I didn't get that sense this time. Globalism is good. Comparative advantage works. Adam Smith was right. He's always been right. He'll always be right. And reducing global trade and reducing collaboration globally is negative. Now, I do think that the current administration was horrific. I mean, horrific at global relations. I think that Donald is probably going to do a better job at that. And I think he'll put people in place that do a better job at that. And so that is wildly positive.
Mark Yusko draws attention to an interesting historical trend called the 90-year cycle, which suggests that the United States appears to go through a significant economic downturn around. Mark Yusko talks about a number of important elements that could influence the economy's future. He begins by discussing the demographic issues the United States is facing, pointing out that 10,000 individuals turn 65 every day, and that this is causing consumer purchasing to decline. It is difficult for future growth and interest rates since older people tend to save more, purchase bonds, and contribute less to economic growth. Yusko believes that demographics are a significant factor in determining the future of the economy, which presents a significant obstacle. Yusko also raises the idea of the 90-year cycle, which states that there is a significant downturn in the United States every 90 years. He points out that the possibility of a major downturn is increased because we are 2 years past the normal 90-year mark. He points out issues including poor policies, inflation, and the unmanageable debt levels that could trigger an economic collapse, even though he admits that a downturn isn't always inevitable. These elements working together can produce a difficult economic climate. In his conclusion, Yusko also highlights a troubling development in the corporate world, referencing the fraud case surrounding NVIDIA and the company's request for immunity from fraud charges. Thank you all for watching. Be sure to leave a like, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed.